Let's see if we have any questions in the panel discussion. So if you'd all like to take your seats for the panel discussion, we can start now. First of all, I'd like to present Ushua Itoiz, who works for the government of Navarra in energy and strategic projects and industry. Andrea Conte, and Piotr Suber, who's Councillor at the Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policy in Poland. Oh, welcome, everybody. We're going to ask questions in Spanish, and you've got your headsets on, so you can answer in English if you want to. If you see that it's necessary for us to speak in English, please tell us. So to start, as you've already warmed up from your presentation, I'd like to ask you a specific question. Jorge, I'd like to ask you our first question. I'd like to remind you all that, of course, you can ask your questions. You can raise your hand, and our colleagues will come around with a microphone. Those of you at home and streaming, you can send us your questions, or we're connected to you through your mobile phone. So let's get going. This panel discussion is talking about energy transition, talking about expectations from public officers and from private businesses. So where does the private sector stand in this transition? There's many sectors that want to make the most of this. Yeah, you've talked about banks and how this is influential. What's the role of the bank there? It's going to surprise you if I say that we think the private sector has a fundamental role in the energy transition, both in climate change and in energy transition. I think that very often when we talk about topics about these climate change or energy transition, we're accustomed to thinking that the governments aren't making strong moves, and obviously governments have got a fundamental responsibility, and they can do it through instruments, through regulations, to try and move resources and production activity, production business, and they can also do it through financing. So we've assumed that the fundamental role in climate change for us is in the public sector for both these challenges. But there's a factor that we can't forget. This energy transition and talking about climate change is at a scale that the public sector just can't deal with all of it. It's just too big. In general, when we talk about the money that we need to address energy transition. So we're talking about $1 trillion or $5 trillion billion. It's a massive amount of money every year, and for the next 20 years. It's so much money that the public sector just can't deal with it, because it coincides that this energy transition period that we're talking about, a period of 20 years, is going to coincide with another effort that the public sector needs to make. We talk about government money as if it was our own. Taxpayers' money is going to go through other challenges that are going to be just as urgent. So just in health, we're going to talk about, we're going to need far more healthcare. The population is growing. So it looks like we're going to have to find money to improve our defense budget. That governments are going to have to increase those areas. And in some countries, we're talking about pensions as well, like the Spanish case. And so this in the next 20 years, we're talking about a 7% rise, which is a magnitude that and we've got to find that money from somewhere. We've got to finance these challenges. So if we add that to financing 20 years of between $1 and $5 billion every year, it's like we've just not got any options. Yeah, and it's come out of COP27 just now, is to try and bring in the markets and the private sector in the efforts to produce, and also in financing efforts, and this transition. The public sector can't do it on its own, but it does have its own role to play. I'm going to give you this now. If you can tell us about your plans at the government of Navarre to work in these directions. I agree with you that we can't, but we do have a role of driving the legislation and so that this might happen. So moving towards green technology and policies. And so many of our current investors are backing green economy investments. So I'd like to just have a little look at the context. So in Navarre, 79% comes from fossil fuels still. So we need a big change to be able to back renewable. Within Navarre, 50% of our electricity does come from renewables. And if we look at the self-consumption, we're talking about 90% coming from renewables. So we've got an opportunity here that we're in pioneers in renewable technology. Yeah, that we've got the first wind farms, and so particularly focusing on wind farm. So and so we've created trends within Europe. So one of the actions that we're doing in terms of energy transition that's very important is increasing the quota of renewables and backing autoconsumption. So we've passed from 12 megawatts of consumption to 80. So this is a trend that we've got a specific investment here and in our industry, and we're backing this type of self-consumption and assuming these energy costs that we saw in the previous talk. If we look in terms of details here, what we're looking at the industrial sector that is concentrating on autoconsumption, and the second one is a residential sector. It's the next largest group. So I think that this is a way of saving energy that we're making our own. Yeah, and being able to mitigate the climate change factor. If we look at the autoconsumption data, look at what's happening in Navarre, not only as a region, but also in terms of territory. So we can see the energy transition that we've been helping with from Nasu-Vinsa over the last few years. So we can see that it's being distributed all over the province. It's these points of autoconsumption. And we're also taking steps towards collective autoconsumption, so mainly in terms of solar panels. But we're also looking at initiatives, looking at decarbonisation, biomass centres, biomass power stations in that way. It's in terms of heating as well. In terms of data per sector, yeah, so 31% is of our industrial GDP. And in 2021, industry consumed 35%. And that's where we're putting most of our, that's where we're working very hard now. That's 35% of the energy that it comes from the industrial section. So they're the one that most produce it and most consumes it. It's sort of an area this is one of our biggest challenges to overcome. We've also got the energy that we use in transport as well. That's now returning to its initial values. What are we doing regionally? An important part that we're doing from public administration is streamlining the paperwork. So be able to create mechanisms to implement these energies, and make it easier, make it simpler. So we've modified several standards and regulations to streamline this, and we've got the regional climate change law that we've been working with last year that gives us a slightly larger framework. In each of the sectors, there are specific plans to set ourselves some at least short-term challenges. So we've got several plans that we've talked about those over the last day and a half. So we've also got small roadmaps in each sector. And of course, we've got grants and incentives that we've talked about that we need. And so, there's 80 million euros in to boost this transition. It's a very strong drive at the moment. So we're one of the communities that is having one of the strongest impacts in this area. So it's given us a real boost to get this up and running, and we think that it's working really well. So it receives a little bit of the grants, and it's just extra information, and of course, you're all very welcome to come and ask in our department to find out more about what we're doing. Thank you very much. So we've seen this a little bit from the perspective of the banks and from the businesses and also from the public administration. I don't know whether to look at it from above, but Andrea, coming from Seville, are you going to talk to us about this governance, green transition, to talk about it one way, and the investment? So we're going to have a quantity of, unthinkable amount of funds to spend on this. Yeah, of course. Thank you for inviting me here to be able to talk here. It's a very great opportunity to connect with people and network with people here, and then the very interesting conversations that we've been able to have talking about technology. And evaluate the policy. So I'm talking about the role of the European Commission and the Central Committee of Research that we've got in. We're coordinating from Seville. So we've got an analysis on the territorial impact. So we provide tools to policymakers in terms of transparent assessment of these policies, the fundamental rules, about the framework that we are working from, to prepare their legislation. So it's very interesting in terms of policy making. It's where scientific evidence is very used for public policy. So that the assessment culture is very different in all the different member states. So we need to see how internal and external scientific services can help us design these policies. However, the context of these challenges that we're talking about today within a framework that we've talked about over these 2 days rather exhaustively, there are many challenges that mark the energy and economic transition. These are dramatic challenges that we've seen over these last few years. COVID, we've seen the invasion of Ukraine, and this is very important terrain for us. So, it's been looking at the impact certainly on territories, that compared to the traditional evaluation that European countries do at a national level. So So I'd like to answer in a joint way. We like to make a network of intelligence to give our best examples, best practice for our policymakers, to be able to share experience and ideas. So extremely briefly, with those two main tools that we've got internalized. These are analysis models. It's a model that describes in great detail the economy and the geography of our territories, giving details of the difference between Sicily and Navarre, for example, and the connection between them, how the territories are distributed and the impacts on them. And then we've got analysis which goes beyond the statistical analysis. All these tools, I don't have time to give you all the details, I'm afraid, but the main challenge is the demand for territorial analysis that which arrives in which makes its way to regional policy. It's going one step further. There's so much greater demand for people, and for those of you know this who are working on this, to be more, you will have more requirements. Yeah, we want you to be more demanding and be more proactive, and these connected, these policies that are connected with the territories. Yeah, we're going from spatially blind to being spatially neutral. There's all sorts of policies on climate change and taxation, all sorts of things. All these policies have been written as policies that have got nothing to do with territorial analysis, and so the demand for this type of policy is appearing much more. So we want to make the most of developing these tools, these fundamental tools, which will allow us to go much further in our territorial policies, and it's sector based as well. And this is fundamental here. The framework should be political, and it will allow us to offer this type of analysis. So we've had the week of European regions. We put out a tool for each autonomous region in Europe. Statistical integration. So we've got this in the framework of innovation. So we're working from innovation. So, and horizontally, we're working then with the structural funds as well. This is all tied in. And we have what's going to be implemented in the recovery context. So we've got several challenges here to develop the narrative sense. So you can read in any newspaper in this last few months the challenge of the how we responded to the COVID crisis, and also in about the green and digital transitions. But what we really talk about are the regional funds, the thematical objectives of this policy in the last 15 years, including in a detailed way on specific details on innovation, digital transformation, green transformation. And the topic that is emerging in many countries is how the governance of the system is appearing in such a way that we can use these territorial funds more efficiently. So this is a big challenge for most countries, and we need to centralize this much better in a new way compared to the tradition and the history that we've come from. How objectives have been handled in the past. So the communication is not only political but also operatively and administratively. Government nationally and regionally. This all falls within this framework that we're working with here. Thematical analysis, that we've published recently. You can see this list here. And also that there's the topic of governance. But what I want to extract from this, here you can see on the right, is how the story of some companies the degree of progress of the cohesion funds for COVID, and the relationship that a simpler system, a simpler national system, taking away the provinces. Well, if we can simplify it, it's always going to be more efficient. Yeah, so taking the experience that we've had from the federal funds, but it's also a very complex situation. But we've got, from our experience in other countries of the complexity of it all, but a region gives better efficiency to the system, and not as several media would like to let us know. I'm just going to finish with my little slide here. We're also talking about a framework, a regulatory framework. Yeah, in terms of cohesion policy. So this came about in March 2020 as a response from the EU to the COVID situation. In reality, the distribution in terms of country, was done within the framework it's purely cohesion policy. So if we're talking about the regulations that we've got here and how things were distributed, it's got very little to do with COVID and a lot to do with cohesion policy regulations and agreements. So we're talking about the distribution between countries. It's exactly the same as cohesion policy. Yeah. And the objective, the 6 macro objectives here of the recovery funds, which is connected to the national plans program for recovery. These look at topics like green digital that are really connected to the FLF funds. So what I want to, it's the idea of governance and the inertia of funds is a topic that will be more and more in the center of discussion, because policies can have a great impact on the territories. And sometimes the history that exists, and not only in the EU, but in each country, fragments the governance, which can reduce the political effect. Last slide on the analytical topic, and how we withstand the green transition. So I've got some experience in this area. So I'd just like to point out a couple of things. It's like, here's a case of a regional... So we talked about FEDER funds to be able to make an impact analysis of public policy on these individual cases. So it will stop regional provinces. So it will help them with their approach to decarbonization.
Tiene conflictos, territorial conflicts. And obviously the policymakers have the need to contribute to generate a transition which will be as little as possible, like in any type of transition, and they can see themselves negatively affected by this transition. And then we can finish with the last contribution, where we're going to have the greatest chance of big data, micro-level data. We have a very strong movement of several member states with the open data. Here we have to ask for more open data as analysts, because it is crucial to have a complementary perspective to the tools that already exists. And using open data, using this territorial aspect, we can get much more scientific evidence so that the impact analysis is better tailored both territorially and we can have a more stricter and more transparent policy.
The relevance of it. From your point of view, how can we use, for example, the data that the ESPON IRI program is using to strengthen the relations between regions and institutions to improve this energy transition in Europe?
Thank you very much for this question. I'm coming from the ministry and the
Gracias por
ministry which is responsible for programming of all structural funds in Poland and plus recovery and resilience plan. So let's say from this point of view and listening to those old presentations and reading the outcomes of this program, I have to say that I'm coming home with a lot of information and also a lot of ideas, and also the question marks. I mean, because I think it is a lot of evidence, and I think that even Xavier presented some let's say some policy, let's say consequences, for policy making. But I think that there are much more than that, and in fact, it must be discussed. Those, let's say, findings. And it will be. I'm sure, at least in Poland, because I think it's very, very interesting, and I will shortly tell you what is of particular interest from my point of view. But also, I would like to say that that should be more discussion at European level. What comes out of this data and of this information we got, because I think it's not so. We are not used to, let's say, to look at things from this perspective of flows so much. And we learned a lot also from other presentations, not so much connected with the project itself, but there is a lot of other aspects we can take into account, like financial things, like institutional things, which haven't been yet the subject of the project itself, but there is worth of looking at it. My particular attention, and I think this is something it should be somehow backed at the European level. The further research on that is connected with the issue of how all regions in Europe just not only, let's say, are linked to each other thanks to different flows, but how those linkages, let's say, convert into opportunities and say, because I think it's not so clear that more and more for me it's not so clear that if we will build more linkages and more, let's say, between regions, that automatically we will have more resilience. I mean, this linkage is not so clear, because one can say that it's also exposure to some additional shocks as well. And of course, in the Polish case, there is also this issue of the COVID and Ukraine and the war in Ukraine is also very important. We are also doing some research on that, and I think, but we will be also very happy to use the research in our, let's say, change also of our regional policy, internal regional policy, because simply it's not longer the external border of the EU, let's say, but we have different, let's say, probably developments ahead of us between Poland and Ukraine, and between Poland and Russia and Belarus, and the same is for other borders. That this depending on political relations, we can have different outcomes of. Different outcomes for and the meaning for political and social development. So I think I will stop here because, as I said, it's so enormous amount of information which was given, which I received here, and I would like to thank very much organizer for that. But also, I think we need to come back home to think a little bit, and to continue discussions in different setups in a different level, European, national, and between regions, countries. What does it mean for the policy making?
Mm-hmm. You have already mentioned it, and our previous speakers also. The war in Ukraine, it's affecting everything. So I would like to introduce Eugenia Maruniak, director of the Institute of Geography from Ukraine. I would like you to introduce your presentation instead of asking first, so whenever you want.
Thank you a lot for involving me in such interesting discussion. It's very brief presentation just to recall certain results of ERIA project and also to emphasize these challenges regarding situation in Ukraine. So when it comes to ERIA results, as it was mentioned yesterday and today in presentations, project considered Ukrainian scenario or so-called black swans, and focused generally on the two main sections, trade of goods, it was today presented in Carla's presentation, and migration, what was presented yesterday in my colleague Tomasz Komroniecki presentation. And as it was mentioned, there was a simulation, and they were developed 4 cases, so-called cases, with certain forecasts regarding number of refugees and their spatial distribution within the ESPON space. And for sure, not all forecasts came true, especially regarding spatial distribution, but for sure we were quite close regarding number of refugees. And what is now clear that for some European countries and regions, challenges of migration, actually challenges of concentration of Ukrainian migrants are more relevant than for other countries and regions, like Poland, Germany, Czech Republic, somehow Italy, Spain to some degree probably. But what we have actually now, it's absolutely a new phase of this Russian-Ukrainian war, so I would say new challenge regarding this destruction of Ukrainian energy system. As you can see on this slide, there is certain correlation between localization of Ukrainian power plants and the results of missile attacks, for instance, on 15th of November. But it's well known that there were missile attacks in October, and it was one more attack in November, actually this week. So the consequences are not so good currently, and we also have to take into account that renewable energy power station, you can see this green and yellow marks in southern Ukraine. They are pretty often also destroyed because of occupation, because of previous missile attacks, so there is also sometimes no energy from this power station at all. And what we have at the moment is that about 50% of Ukraine's energy system is out of order, and we can't anticipate what will be next week, for instance. For sure, it changed people's life. Because sometimes there is no electricity, no water, no heating, especially in big metropolitan area, it's crucial. So we can expect a new wave, new migration wave, so we can expect new challenges for European regions, probably sometimes the same countries and regions as it was previously. And for sure there are risks of further destruction. And so probably there is a need for new simulation, new attempts to rethink this situation and to find new solutions for different types of regions, because I guess that pretty often some consequences may overlapping in one or two or three regions. I mean, trade consequences, migration consequences, and some features of regions at all. So for sure there is a need of further research and policy making. And for sure it would be good if Ukraine will be involved more in this process of research and probably decision making.
Thank you. Quiero aprovechar a todo aquel, no nos queda mucho tiempo.
I wanted to, anybody wants to ask any questions, they should do it now, because then they can answer. Any of the 5 people can answer any questions if anybody wishes to ask any questions. Well, he's mic'd actually, so he doesn't need the handheld microphone. Thank you. I only have one question. I'm sure it's very difficult to answer. There's certain needs of reducing greenhouse gas emissions or mitigating the climate change. And we have a relatively small opportunity window. We need a spectacular, they were talking about trillions, but the challenge is monumental. Despite the fact that it's monumental, the time that we have to meet the commitments we have to have the average temperature not increase by 1.5 degrees, the window is very short. I know there's no respect, but how can we accelerate the process? If anybody would dare to, I'm sure there's no answer, but I mean, if anybody wants to ask a question.
Sorry, I will give you a short answer from Poland. What is happening now accelerated the process of the change and thinking about energy transformation. Because in fact, for different reasons, Poland or people in Poland were not so keen to embark on the process, let's put it in this way, at political level, but at, let's say, in society as such. And what is now happening because of as a consequence of the war in Ukraine, like changed the mindset of the political class. In the recent month, it was a decision made after, let's say, 30 years of discussions to build nuclear power stations, or 2 already at the time. So one private, one semi-public. Then it was a decision to let's say to pass the legislation on renewables, allowing for faster deployment of renewables, windmills and things like that. So that was also the speed. And also I think still there are some, let's say, problems, but it's not about money. It's still about, let's say, understanding that if we are talking about the Green Deal, this is not just strategy to change the source of power, of energy, but it is also an opportunity at the end of the day to stay competitive, to bring in a longer term also good results for people and society. And I think that was the main problem, which is now paradoxically is being a little bit seen in a different way, because still is a problem. Okay, you need time, you need to invest and so on, but the mindset is changing, and I think this is quite good and obvious. So let's start from the mindset, and it will be easier.
¿Queríais añadir por aquí? Sí.
Did you want to add anything? I agree. I agree with this, and I think that we have the mix that we need to bring it ahead. We have the European Union with the Green Deal. That we also have the Fit for 55. We have the Repower EU, where we have even more ambitious goals. And after the invasion of Ukraine, we have that safe gas for winter, that 15%. I think we have the structure at the level of the European continent and at the regional level. It is true that we have been made a commitment to green economy and circular economy and green energy. And we are in a good position from the public sector and also economically. And now we have a window of health, public health, which are going to help this change. And we have an awareness on the part of society, which makes it a lot easier to explain why we don't need to have this dependency than it was a few years ago. So we have brought together all these things, plus the financial situation, which after the crisis seems to be recovering. So I think it's an opportunity. I think we're accelerating it, and we hope we'll be accelerating it enough to reach the 2030 goals and the 2050 goals. Yeah. I couldn't be more agree, because there has been a paradigmatic change precisely arising from the invasion of Ukraine on the part of Russia. I totally agree with this idea of changing mindset. I'd like to say something about the financial sector. This change, this acceleration is taking place already. The change with respect to funding of the non-green towards the green sector, how can this be accelerated more? To give you a very specific example, which I think is very relevant, here in Spain from the financial sector, if somebody is on the forefront of the funding changing from the brown to green economy, that's CaixaBank. It's a bank that is the cutting edge of this. The banks have exposures in transition risk of about 20% of their loans, and if they're maintaining it, we did this. What we discovered that in a 20-year horizon, those exposures are going to take them under different climate scenarios. This would increase their losses from loans at about 20%. So, yeah, it's in their losses if they continue with what they're doing right now. So this financing movement is happening. And as far as awareness is concerned, there's something that is also accelerated, that once everyone is aware of this, there's a certain a shaming effect on those who are not doing it. And in the financial sector, I want to show you, there's something which is the banks are not going to be from a reputation point of view, the financial sector is not going to be able to find, and it's to be singled out as guilty parties. When somebody says, oh, we're doing all this, and somebody says that what you have been doing, you have been funding the greatest financer of fossil energies, and you're going to be putting 82 billion. When this happens, you get an immediate change. This is the same bank as before. It's Credit Suisse. It's not that I have anything against it. It's that it seems to be getting into hot water all the time. For example, when somebody doesn't follow the current trends, they're out of the picture, because right now we have seen an increase that they have this tremendous business opportunities. And as Gordon Gekko said, avarice is good. And if they don't do that, if the financial sector doesn't finance this transition, they're going to have greater losses. I don't want any question. Okay, well, thank you very much, George, Piotr, Andrea, Ushue, for your contributions.
Gracias.
Thank you. So.